Welcome back to our Peace Through Strength podcast, brought to you by the American Security Council Foundation. I'm your host, Joy Vautrebeck. And back with me is our senior analyst, Lauren Stanford.
Glad to be here.
Thank you, Larry. And today we're going to talk about BRICS and South America. Larry recently wrote a paper titled Bigger BRICS in Russia. We also presented a webinar on BRICS. And for all of Larry's articles, you can find them at www.ascf.us. While you're there, please sign up for our newsletter and it will inform you of all of our upcoming webinars. So Larry, we discussed BRICS in some detail on the webinar, but we did not dive deep into South American countries' interest in BRICS. Could you talk a little to some of the South American countries, such as Bolivia and Cuba, who have been invited to BRICS as partners, or I call them observers?
Well, BRICS, as you know, stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And it's a consortium of developing countries, though why anyone considers China to be a developing country. They're the world's second largest economy. Though on a per capita basis, one could say they are developing. Their economy is less than the United States, and they have 4 times the population. So their average citizen makes less than 25% of what an American does. So in a way, they are developing, but they certainly have all the bells and whistles of an industrial superpower when it comes to industry and military. But in any event, that's a consortium where they got together a number of years ago, 20-odd years ago, with the idea of that the Western civilization, in particular the United States and Western Europe, dominate world institutions. And so they said, well, geez, we ought to get together to have more influence on the world institutions, such as the United Nations. And I think they have a point. The Security Council, for example, in the United Nations is the same 5 countries or 6 countries that were installed in 1946 when the UN was formed. And it does not include the number 3 industrial power in the world, China. It doesn't include India. It does not include Japan. So there's some room, in my opinion, for modifications to the UN. So anyways, that's sort of the idea. Plus, the dependency upon the American dollar causes problems for many countries in regards to deficits in spending and the ability to fund programs. So if they have a deficit and they don't have enough cash in their reserve, they have to use US dollars to buy oil, for example. If they don't have oil in their country, they have to buy oil via the dollar. And if they don't have a strong surplus, they can't buy oil. And so they're saying, well, why can't we trade in our own currency and have better control over our fate? And so that, again, is where we are. But in South America, BRICS, in regards to Cuba and Bolivia, they're both, well, Bolivia is questionable, but certainly Cuba is part of the communist empire. And China is all in favor of that. China sort of dominates BRICS because they represent 60% of all the economy, and they certainly are the military power. Russia is not too far behind.
And they have the New Development Bank in Shanghai.
Yeah, right. They control a new development bank, which is a new bank, sort of like the World Bank, about 20% the size of the World Bank as far as lending is concerned. But it's headquartered in Shanghai, and it's run by the communist or ex-communist or ex-Brazilian president running the bank. So they have that issue. But in South America, Bolivia is going through governments. And so I don't know if you can call him a Marxist commentary or not. There's all sorts of turmoil going on down there. So, but they want to get a hold of Bolivia and make them friends because they have one of the world's big deposits for lithium.
Yes.
And lithium is the main ingredient in making electric vehicle batteries. So there's that angle. And Cuba is basically because it's communist and hates America
and strategically close to the
right.
U.S.
And China uses Cuba as a listening post. They have a couple of spy stations down there with big antennas and satellites and all that sort of stuff, tracking satellites. So that's why they're there. And as we know, in right next to Cuba are the Bahamas, and the China has, I think, its world's largest embassy in the Bahamas, a little country. And why would they have it right next to the United States off the coast of Florida? But in South America, to me, the most interesting aspect is what's going on in Peru. And it made the news recently because President Xi from China came to South America, and as did President Biden. And Xi came to inaugurate a $1.4 billion mega port on the coast of Peru to facilitate trade between China and Peru, and of course, access to the rest of South America. And the access to the South America is witnessed by or evidenced by Brazil is spending $3 billion to build a railway from Brazil into Peru so that Brazil can better export cheaper, faster, its soybeans and iron ore to China. And it opens up other aspects along the whole west coast of South America, Peru, Ecuador, Chile. So it's just the beginning. And China controls many ports throughout the world. And it's something that we talk about, and everyone sort of says, what are we going to do about it? That at the Panama Canal, which is strategic interest to the United States, both sides of the Panama Canal, on the Pacific coast and on the Atlantic coast, both ports are controlled by Chinese companies. So Chinese companies control many ports throughout the world, and they are doing this here again in Peru. So there's some
part of their Belt and Road Initiative throughout the whole globe.
Right, it's the Belt and Road Initiative is part of it, BRI. So
Yes.
yeah, so it's intertwined, the BRI with BRICS. Sometimes.
Yes, I would agree, and that kind of gets into my next point here. And we talked about the new development bank, but BRICS is supposed to be an alternative to Western institutions, as we discussed, such as the International Monetary Fund, which South American countries are a little leery of. BRICS claims they will not put undue pressure on countries, unlike Western institutions. But China's new development bank is the financial institution backing these BRICS projects.
Yes.
And Larry, China has been known to lack transparency.
Yeah. Well,
So do you believe there will be some pressure from China, such as Belt and Road participation?
Yeah, it's not only the new development bank, though. Chinese banks do significant lending. And bankers are
yes.
bankers. They're going to put the squeeze on you. And the perfect example is years ago, part of the Belt and Road Initiative was in Sri Lanka, formerly known as Ceylon, where the Chinese built a port on the southern part of the island through some shenanigans of a ruling political family and who's since been overthrown because of the corruption involved. But they built this port, and it was financed with Chinese money, and the Sri Lankans can't pay the loan. And so part of the loan agreements were that China would now control the port and sizable areas all around the port. So yeah, and that's raised eyebrows all over the world, and it's caused concern in other countries. In Kenya, they're building a railway that's no way ever going to pay for itself. So who's going to end up paying for that one too? So I think there's some awareness going on that bankers are bankers and money is money, and they will come to pay the dues one way or the other.
And speaking of which, the North Abaco port was built by a Chinese company as well. And the Bahamas is, my understanding, paying them back, but the port is not usable. And now they did have a hurricane there, but it's been, I think, 4 years almost, and it's not usable. So they need more money into this.
Well, one thing Bahamas has is American tourists spending a lot of money.
Yes, that is
in
true.
Gambling in the Chinese-owned resorts.
Speaking of Chinese-owned resorts and gambling, a lot of that happens along the Caribbean islands. So.
So the Chinese are here, and you can't wishfully think them. And I have to say that, if I were a developing country and I was having problems raising money, if I could raise money from the new development bank of the Chinese, I would, and the payback period, well, I'll worry about that down the road, especially since I'll be retired by then. So they're here to stay. The Chinese are here to stay. And in a way, the competition might make us a little stronger and better.
Well, hopefully.
Yes.
And interestingly, in your paper, you did mention that Argentina declined BRICS membership because they want to stay aligned with the Free West.
Yeah, I think Huntington's Clash of Civilizations book, where the world is evolving into civilizations controlling the scenario as opposed to ideologies. This book was that the civilizations, the Western civilization, the Chinese Western civilization, Islamic civilizations, are the determining factors on how the world is evolving, versus the ideologies of capitalism versus communism, Nazism. Those are fading away. So it's civilizations. And I think we're sort of evolving towards that scenario of Western civilization competing against Chinese communist civilization, Islamic civilization, and who knows. I don't know how to classify Russia.
Well, I was going to say, it sounds also like religions versus maybe even non-religions.
China is communist, so they're
right,
not.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's different kind of ideologies there as well.
Yeah, well, China, as you know, is persecuting not only the Muslims in Xinjiang, but they persecuted Christians and Falun Gong and anybody else.
Whoever's not going along with the government.
Communist, yeah, and Marxist, yeah.
So I have a question.
Okay.
Speaking of South America, and Brazil as being a founding member of BRICS. Let's say, for instance, Bolsonaro was re-elected president there. Do you think he would take Brazil out of BRICS?
Well, I hate that phrase. That's a good question. Basically, it's an excuse to delay while you try to think of something. I don't have the answer to that, because once you're into it, it's hard to get out. And one could argue BRICS is a twofold operation. Is the political, which China is trying to drive a wedge into American control, trying to drive a wedge against the West and so forth. And then there's the economic. So if I'm in Brazil and I want to trade with Argentina, you know, it might not be a bad deal economically to trade in the local currencies and get away from the US dollars. And so I can see from an economic viewpoint BRICS existence to try to develop some counterweight for the dominance of Western society. Between Europe and America, over 50 or 60% of the world's gross national product. And I think maybe we represent, what, 10% of the population, 15% of the population of the world. So there's a lot of people out there. The US is 350, Europe's about the same. So 700 or 800 million West Europeans and Americans versus the 7 billion other people in the world. So there's a lot of room for them to grow. So,
and that brings up another, actually we discussed this on the webinar shortly. These countries like Argentina, let's say Bolsonaro was in charge of Brazil, and maybe they don't want to be politically involved with countries like China, Russia. They don't ideologically align.
No.
They don't agree with China and Iran sending drones to help Russia fight Ukraine. You think they might pull away their own bloc and come up with a trading?
It could very well. My feeling is that as long as they don't attack us, they're okay. I mean, India's part of BRICS. And they're not friends with China at all.
No.
And Russia might be friends with China now, but I still think down the road, I don't see how they can continue to be friends. I look at a map and I see Siberia unoccupied by people, and there's a billion Chinese waiting to grow, and Chinese has some historical claims to parts of Siberia anyways, because they were there centuries ago. So Russia is in between, and who knows what's going to happen in Russia after Putin dies. And he will die eventually. So things change, and I think Huntington's civilization is, as years go on, in my opinion, is more and more accurate as to the way things will evolve. And if I were a Peru or an Ecuador or Colombia, I'd like to make deals with other countries of my size and influence to see if we can get together to make a better deal. In America, we have unions. We have trade groups. So there's nothing fundamentally unhuman or different about getting together to form trade groups. It's just the political angle with China dominating is the issue.
Right. So right now it's to their advantage economically, but maybe they don't politically or ideologically agree and align. So maybe we'll see in the future another bloc come out of this.
Precisely. And India is a good example. Yeah.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate your intake on your paper there.
Thanks, Joy.
Thank you to our listeners.
Nice to be here.
And please subscribe, share, and comment on our YouTube and Rumble channels. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Substack. Please like and follow us there. And again, our website is www.ascf.us, where you can find Larry's articles, sign up for our newsletter to watch out for our upcoming webinars, and also become a member of the ASCF. Thank you again, Larry.
Thank you, Joy.
Thank you to our listeners, and join us next time for Peace Through Strength podcast.